welcome back to the Gamerpreneur podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today's episode, we're talking about when to do it yourself. So in the last episode, I kind of discussed a little bit about pitch decks, right? And I was talking about how I had two pitch decks come in the morning, and one of those decks, clearly they paid someone to design it for them. And the other one, they clearly made themselves. And it got me thinking about, when should you do it yourself? And when should you hire it out? And I think for the most part, the answer is pretty straightforward. If you can afford it, hire someone to do it for you, unless you have to put in your special sauce. Okay. And no dirty stuff here. This is a business show. Okay. When you have to have like the special touch on your deck, or your project, or the art that you're making, or whatever it is, if you have the skill and the technique to be able to do that, then I would say do it yourself. Otherwise, if you can afford it, hire it out, because it saves you time, because they're probably more trained than you are. They'll do it more efficiently, quicker, better than you would. And at the end of the day, if you think about what your true hourly rate should be as an entrepreneur, your true hourly rate should be a couple $1,000s an hour. And if you compare that to someone you can get off of Fiverr, or someone that you know locally who can do that service, it should mean that they're less expensive in the long run. Okay. Because your hourly rate, you should be making deals as a business owner. You should be plugging and making phone calls and wheeling and dealing and making things happen, not necessarily designing a pitch deck or programming your app. As business owners, like we need to get out of the mindset of making the sandwiches. I've brought up the sandwich maker in the past, a guy who's really good at making sandwiches. Like everybody in his neighborhood, all of his friends know his sandwiches. His family, makes him pack the sandwiches for their cross-country trips, right? And so one day somebody tells him he should make a business out of this because he's just so darn good. So he's like, sure. And he goes and he signs the lease for the place, and he orders the stuff, and he gets everything ready. And then he realizes, hey, I'm not making sandwiches. Like I'm sitting here like paying payroll and making sure security is happening and like cleaning the trash can. Like this is not what I signed up for. I wanted to make sandwiches. Business owners don't usually get to do the thing that they got into business to do. They have to oversee the thing. Now, you could hire, okay, here's another example of when do you do it yourself. You could hire someone to be the executive for your business to run that whole thing, but you need to have the cash flow, obviously. In that situation, if you've got the person, in the right spots, you've hired those positions, you can go ahead and do the job, okay? Now, if you can't necessarily afford it, then I would say you have to do it yourself. All right. If you can't afford it, hire someone to do it. If you can't afford it, do it yourself. All right. If you are like in this weird in between, like you can afford certain things and you can't necessarily afford other things, and you're making and weighing and balancing the things that you have to choose to do, I would say hire the things that are the most that would create the most efficiencies for you. Okay. So like if I was going to build out a business plan for a client, okay, as an example, I could do the market research myself. I could go and I could sit here on my computer and visit the various websites and, check and cross-reference and run spreadsheets and create tables and figure out all this information and put it into nice digestible form. And, it could take me a day, it could take me a couple days to run all this information. Depending on the subject matter, it might be really difficult to find details. So then you got to like call people up and try to like get them to provide you information like that. It could take time. So if I was going to be writing a business plan for somebody, I most likely, and I usually do, hire out all that market research. I just hire it out. I hire people with, MBAs and doctoral degrees and like economics and whatnot like that, and have them do that work. Send it to me. And then once I have that, I can write out the business plan and talk about the strategy and the marketing plan that we're going to have and create the graphs and charts on top of that. That's not hard. That's all in Excel. Like I could do that because the market research is the part that like you have to spend all your brain power in. That takes a lot of time. And so because of that, I would hire that service. To build out the pitch deck, I may not be the best graphic artist on the planet. If I had to choose between the two, this one's going to cost like $1,500 and this one's going to cost $150, the design work. So like, that's not a good comparison, but if they were the same, definitely hire out the research. Now, if you are an artist, that's an easy option, right? Because the art's your thing. But if you're kind of the bookworm and you're not an artsy kind of person and you don't really write well, but you can research like, nobody's business, maybe you would do this part and you'd hire out the other things. So you got to figure out what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. I will say this, when you're building your own business, you are going to have these weird situations, though, where say you do hire someone to do it and the work product they give back is junk, or at least in your opinion, it's junk. And in that situation, I would say try again. Okay. Part of going into business is figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And people are just one of those categories you got to figure out. So I've hired lots of different artists through the years. I've hired lots of different researchers through the years. I've had lots of different sales, phone sales people, and many of them do not work out. Only a handful have worked out, but I wouldn't have found the handful had I not gone through the junk, right? Like the people who just don't make what I wanted or didn't do what I wanted, I had to go through them to find the right people. If I just stuck with the people I didn't want, I was never going to get what I wanted and I would be burning my money. It just wouldn't be a good time for anybody. But going back to the point I was making, maybe you come across one of those people who, just for better or worse, just doesn't give you what you want. I had this happen not too recently with a pitch deck that I was having designed for a business I was working with. And I could design the pitch deck myself, okay? And I understood from the very beginning I could design myself. My business partners understood I could design it for us. And we all agreed, no, Brad, we'll hire a professional to do this. Okay, sure thing, no problem. But we just need this pitch deck quickly because like people are asking for it. And so we hired an artist and a week goes by and nothing happens. Like, in fact, the artist ghosted us. So we're like, shucks, okay, we'll hire another artist. And I'm like, again, I could do it. Like if we need to hustle, I can do it. Okay. And they're like, no, let's hire an artist. So we went, hired another artist. About 5-6 days later, the artist comes back to us and goes, I'm not really that kind of artist. I do this other kind of art, but like pitch decks aren't really my thing. Like, okay, well, shucks, like, we needed that like 2 weeks ago. So what do we do? So we went and we hired somebody else. And that other person was like, I can do it. And I'm like, okay, like I'm still here. Like if this one fails, like I'm just going to do it. And so that person, it took about 5 days for them to come back and they brought us back a pitch deck and it did not look great. It was not great at all. And so at that point, I'm like, you know what? I don't even care if you guys want to hire anybody. I'm just going to make it. It took me about 5 hours to do it. And I brought it back and they're like, wow, this is exactly what we wanted. Like, wow, why wouldn't we just use you from the start? So there are times that's going to happen to you. What I want to tell you is don't give up on hiring people. Okay. Just because you might have been able to do it better, faster, whatever. This time doesn't mean that you need to shoulder that burden next time. It just means you need to find the right people. There are people out there who are really, really good, really fast, make fantastic work. You just haven't found them yet. Okay. So in this example, I made the pitch deck and it looks fantastic, but I don't want to do the pitch deck next time. I would rather be on calls. I would rather be doing the wheeling, dealing and making the business move forward rather than kind of the grunt routine artsy stuff that like there's thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people on this planet who would be head over heels to get a couple $100 to do it. Right. My time is worth more than like I would spend in order to get someone to do it. But I had to, because at this point, like, we needed it 3 weeks ago. And so the value of getting it done was so great that it was worth it for me to do it now. Okay. So it ends up being a cost benefit analysis at the end of the day. And I think I started this discussion with it. Like it depends on if you can afford it or not. All right. Sometimes time is the thing you can no longer afford. And so if that's the situation, you may have to do it yourself. So on that note, I'm going to remind you all, organization is the enemy of sloth. This goes back to something I've talked about many times in the past. Figure out what you're good at. Figure out what you want to do. figure out the things you're not good at, and figure out the things you don't want to do. And if you can figure out those 4 categories of different tasks and objectives and jobs and whatever, you can decide the things you are going to work on, and you can decide the things that you're going to hire out. If you don't have the money to hire it out, well, clearly either you do it yourself, one, or you find someone to be part of your business and get sweat equity. So maybe they get a small percentage of your company for doing this, or they get some percentage of profits or revenues in the future for doing that task. And you just have to figure out how to wheel and deal in that way. But you have to start knowing yourself. All right. It's written on the arch over the temple of Apollo at Delphi, know thyself. It's not in English, it's in Greek, but it says know thyself. And so that is like the first tenet of business. You have to know you before you can get business partners, before you can get investors. Because if you go and talk to an investor and they start asking you questions about kind of like, what are your plans? What are you hoping to do? Oh, I don't know. I just like having a good time. What does that mean? What do you like? What's the goal for this business? I don't really know. What do you plan on doing with it? I just hope on working. No one's going to want to work with you. You have to know what you're looking to do in your life, where you're looking to go, what you're looking to do with this business, what you want to focus on, what you think you're good at. If you are willing to admit your weaknesses, that makes you a stronger person than the person who's not willing to admit their weaknesses. The person who's not going to admit their weaknesses is the person who's going to bite off more than they can chew, and they're going to get in trouble and everything falls apart around them. The person who can admit that they're not able to do something, they're not good at something, is the person who can go get help. And once you have help, you have multiple people working on something, and that task, that job moves much faster, and it's much more successful usually. So that's what I got for you all today. Mind you all, don't be just a gamer, be a gamerpreneur.